Hello, and welcome back to my podcast, A Woman of Leisure. And welcome to the episode 2 of a summer series I am calling the Reinvention Roadmap. And in this series, I am detailing my lived framework for how I transitioned myself from living in New York City to coming here, New York City to Provence. So, as I mentioned in the episode 1, I was living in Nice, France at the time, and I went back to the States for what I thought would be a holiday visit with my family. That holiday visit turned into a 5-year séjour. So, as I mentioned prior, my brother suggested I check out the programs at the community college while I was there. And what I found there opened up my mind to other possibilities. Now, when I discovered the programs and that I would be eligible for certain programs that would facilitate my return to university, I also, in tandem, wanted to weigh my options. Okay, so at the time, I was exploring other career possibilities that would allow me to travel. So, as you might suspect, I applied for flight attendant positions as well as some cruise lines. And this brings me to today's topic: identifying a challenge versus a detour. So, my 5-year stay with my family as I went back to university turned into a detour. Okay, but a detour, or repositioning, I should say, a repositioning. And while I was exploring other career options, other career opportunities, as you might imagine, I got certain callbacks, certain re-interviews, and there's just this whole recruitment process. Now, one position, well, there were a couple actually. I'm going to try and zone in on one. Well, actually, they all worked in tandem because they all had the same result. So I had been invited to interview with one particular airline. I had also received an offer for a cruise line, to join a cruise line. And now with the cruise line in particular, they sent me a contract. They sent me a 32-page contract, which I was supposed to sign, along with some other paperwork. Now the contract, again, was 32 pages. I've done equity shows, equity tours, where I never received a 32-page contract. So I was intent on reading this bad boy in detail. 32 pages? What's going on here? I passed it around to some other folks who had background in criminal justice and reading contracts, things of that nature. My brother-in-one, who is a degree in criminal justice. Now, I'm also aware that when you work on a cruise line, because once you get a certain distance from shore, at least when you're working in international waters, once you get a certain distance from shore, you're no longer under U.S. law. And this is something that people really need to understand. That once you leave the U.S., you are under a different law system. But under a cruise line, you are under international law, okay, because you're at sea, okay, and the sea is shared by multiple nations. So you're under U.S. International law. So I realized that had a lot of weight with the detail involved in the contract. But still, I was reading this contract. I was highlighting things I did not understand, because the thing with the nature of contracts, there's a reason why people go through so many years of law school. It's all in the details, okay? So I was underlining things I didn't understand, highlighting things I didn't understand, forming questions or whatever. So I'm looking over this thing, and about 2 days later, the cruise director reached back out to me and said, "Hey, we need that paperwork back." I said, "Hey, you sent me 32 pages. I'm going over this bad boy with a fine-tooth comb," okay? So I went back, sent him a couple of questions, he answered the questions as he could, but I was also aware that it was his job as an employee and as someone who was recruiting a new employee or new recruit. His job was not necessarily to give me the lowdown. His job was to protect the cruise line, to protect the enterprise. So I always sought outside counsel. So after about, let's say 2 emails where I asked him questions, he says to me, call me the following Monday. I said, okay. So sure enough, I kind of knew what was coming. He was like, yeah, I don't think that you're going to be the right fit for this, so on and so forth. And I said, okay, fine. If asking questions. Oh, that was the other thing. That's what I did. I asked him if there was the possibility of negotiating a a little bit more salary because of the terms of the contract. And he says, yeah, I don't think that you're. Okay, fine. That's totally fine. I understood, and I would rather lose an opportunity because of my due diligence, because I did my due diligence. As a matter of fact, what he said to me was, he said, well, even though this isn't going to work out, I don't think it's going to work out. He said to me, I do appreciate you reading the contract, because we get a lot of people who come on and realize that the reality is very different from what they had in their mind, and it becomes a problem. And I'm like, okay. So you understand why I'm reading the contract, okay? And not only reading the contract, but asking questions. And I do recognize that with a lot of human resources, that can be, they skirt the issues, okay? Because remember, they're not there to help you. They're there to protect the company. Now, I had some other similar, but not to that extent. I had some other experiences with the airline, so to speak. And basically, all in all, it was 3, okay? 2 airlines, 1 cruise line. And I said, now with the airlines, it wasn't that I asked questions. I didn't even get to that point, okay? I got to a certain level, or there was one where they invited me to the group interview, but I had to pay for my own ticket. That was very difficult at the time, as you might imagine, because I was focused on other things. So then there was another very high level airline that I was interested, whom I got to the final level right before, because there's a whole process of video interviews and things like that. I made it to the final phase, where it said, we will be contacting you shortly about a face-to-face interview or whatnot. But then nothing. Radio silence. All of my inquiries about the follow-ups or anything like that were basically met with, don't call us, we'll call you. And later on, I realized it was because they had completely redesigned their recruitment process. I said, okay, so I had these delays. Now I had to think to myself, do I keep applying? Do I keep pushing? But I've learned that if you have to push too much, chances are it's not for you. Just like with the cruise line. He says, oh, I appreciate you reading the contract, because some people get here and they're shocked, and then we have a problem. They realize it's not for them. So I'm saying, okay, so he realized this is not for you. Okay, fine. Get it. Absolutely get it. In terms of saving myself, preserving my own peace, and again, changing direction. There's something better out there for me. And in my experience, if you have to push too much, chances are your energy and your resources are better used someplace else. Okay, so, and then on the other side, I had this chance to reignite or revisit my education. Now, here's the other thing. Throughout my working experience, all to the time I was busting my hump with several different jobs at one time, every now and again somebody would ask, oh, would you consider going back to school? And I always just kind of said, only if I qualify for financial aid. Because the one thing I didn't have at that time was debt. and everyone I knew was swimming in student debt. So yeah, so I always just said, oh, only if I get financial aid. Didn't happen a lot, but I said it a number of times. So when I went back to the community college, because of my sojourn in Nice, France, where I lived for a little bit more than a year, I had to wait a few more months, but they said, because you have not worked because I was living off my savings, because you have not worked in all this time, you would qualify for financial aid. Now, keep in mind, this was back in 2018, I think it was, something like that. 2018? That I started my community college journey, okay? And again, I had to wait some months, but they said, this is what we can do for you. And my whole world opened up in the sense of, okay, if I took one of those other positions that I thought I wanted, this would not be on the table anymore, because the whole reason I was getting this opportunity, not to return to school, but to return to school under financial aid, was the fact that I essentially had no income for almost 2 years. Now, if I had gone back to school, not back to school, but if I had taken any one of those positions, that would have disqualified me from the financial aid position. So I said to myself, you know what, I will never, ever, it was a sweet spot in time. It was just, the stars were aligned, okay? It was a sweet spot in time, and I said, if I don't strike now, I will never have this opportunity ever again. And that is one of the signs or markers of a detour, is that it takes you off your course or delays your course, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. So, yes, that's part of my book, is identifying a challenge or detour. So I invite you to download that and check that out. And once you download that and review the challenge or detour, I would like for you to mention in the comments when something posed itself as was it a challenge or a detour? So just answer challenge or detour. Now, the other thing to mention about challenges, there are times when a challenge is well worth pushing through. But then, at the same time, how do you measure whether or not it was worth it? I have a friend who is an attorney. Okay, I'm going to keep this brief. I have a friend who is an attorney, and she was a corporate attorney, and she was working for a very well-known company. But there was another very well-known company, that was her goal, was to get to this company. She was miserable. Okay, at the time she was working for the original company, she was miserable. When she was at point A, she was frustrated, she was tired, she didn't want to be there. And yes, lo and behold, and she had several, that's the key. She had several interviews with her dream company and made it to the final rounds, only to be rejected. And this happened so many times. It happened like 5 times, where she made it all the way to the top, where it was like 3 finalists or whatnot, and she got rejected. So just as she was about to give up, finally, she lands that dream job. When she got to that dream job, you know what she told me? She said that she excelled. She didn't just say it, I saw it. She excelled, okay? Getting all kinds of bonuses or whatnot, and they all came so easily to her. You know what she said to me? She said that the differentiating factor in what made her stand out in this new position is not the training, but the experiences and what she learned in those final few years, those final 3-4 years with that former company, that made all the difference. That made all the difference. So when she finally got to her goal, she not only got in the door, she shot to the top very, very quickly, simply because of those final years when she really wanted to give up. She wanted to tear her hair out. Sorry if you can hear my beau pair is just pulling into the driveway. So, yeah. So that's when putting staying the course can pay off. It all depends on what your ultimate goal is. So yes, please check out my free download. Check out your free download, actually. The link is in the description. And let me know just your last experience, challenge or detour. Talk to you later. Thank you for listening.